Hi guys, welcome back to my podcast, Life Unfiltered with Jo. You did not have an episode last week. I was going to, and then honestly, I just got caught up in the holidays, and I figured, you know what, people are going to be enjoying their holiday anyways. They're not going to be listening to podcasts and things like that. So I went ahead and I skipped last week. That is my very first time that I have ever skipped a week of my podcast. So it kind of felt weird. I kind of felt like I was letting myself down in a way. I started this as a hobby, and I really have stuck true to it and put in the work and continued to deliver for you guys. So I'm sorry that didn't happen, but here we are back again to close out the year of 2021. So before we get started, let's go into our Amazon review. Now, if you guys like decorating like I do, I decorate for every single holiday. And this is my first year actually decorating with pillows like on my couch. But the thing is like I go to TJ Maxx, and even though TJ Maxx is like a cheaper store, the pillows for decor are still so expensive. Like I cannot afford that. Absolutely not. So off of Amazon, I bought 2 just white pillows. Actually, I bought 4. I'm sorry. I bought 4, but it comes in a package of 2. White pillows, 16 by 16. And since they're plain white, I can go ahead and purchase any pillow cover I want to match my decor for the holiday season to put over it. So I'm not buying a brand new pillow every single holiday I want to decorate for, but just the pillowcases, which are actually easier to store anyways. So I highly recommend going that route if you are on a budget. Again, I bought 2 pillows, 16 by 16, and they are going for, let me look it up, $16.99. So only basically like $8 a pillow. I'll go ahead and put the link in the description box. Again, this link helps me out. If you were to click on the link and purchase anything from Amazon, I do receive a small commission. So I would really appreciate it if you guys could just even click on the link, even if you don't think you're going to buy anything, just to see if something's in your cart that you could help me out. So there's that. And then starting for this podcast, we're actually going to go into religion. So I was talking with one of my friends, and she had a very different spiritual background than I did. And as I always say in this podcast, have those conversations with your friends and the people that you know. Have conversations that you guys don't see eye to eye. It's healthy to be able to see people's other point of view, other experiences, and things like that. So I decided that this would be a perfect time to bring on this podcast because of Christmas. Christmas it could be a very spiritual holiday for some people, and others it's not. So I just wanted to have this religion conversation, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. Recording with my friend, and she's not video today, so if you're watching the visual you will only see me, but if you're listening, even the video, but if you're listening just on Spotify, Google, Apple Podcasts, and you'll be able to hear both of us. So one point that I've always made on my podcast is I think it's really important for friends to have different views, which is kind of interesting because people think like you connect with who you have like similarities as, which is true 100%. But a lot of people that I've experienced, if I don't have the same view as you, like they almost like don't want to be your friend, or like a lot of times like back in high school, like that was the thing. Like if y'all disagreed, like y'all weren't friends. But like I grew to be like, no, like let's have a discussion about that, because even if I hear your side and I don't agree with 100%, I might be able to take like a small grain of salt and be like, wow, like I'm going to pick up on that and I'm going to implement that into my life or whatever. So that's why I really enjoy these conversations, because I think it's like awesome to have maybe controversial or debating conversations, because the world is so, I don't know, everyone has a different view, a different upbringing, different everything. So like I love these conversations. But today the conversation is going to be on religion and how everyone grows up differently. Religion means different things to different people. People worship different things, higher power. Some people don't even believe in anything, things like that. So my friend and I were talking, and we have had very different experiences. And some of the experiences that she has had, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, that I've never heard of that, or things like that. So I just wanted to have a conversation on a podcast, bringing it to the open and knowing that everyone's accepted and everyone can have different views and everyone does have different experiences, and that's okay. So let's get into your experience with religion, what that was, what you believed in, how you were raised, your parents, things like that. Like, what did that look like for you?
So I grew up a pastor's kid. So yeah, I grew up in like a more Southern Baptist church, and I've been in Baptist churches like my entire childhood and everything. So originally when I was younger, my parents were missionaries, so we'd go around to different churches helping with ministries and stuff. And then as I got older, my dad started establishing his own and started pastoring. And so I grew up in a very conservative Christian, very religious family. Like, we were in the church like every time the doors were open.
Interesting. So what is a Baptist? Like, what? I'm not from that religion. I've never experienced that. I've never learned about it. So if someone were to say, hey, I'm a Baptist, like, what do those rules look like? What do they follow?
So thing with Baptists is they always say that they don't follow a religion, that it's a relationship. Okay. Although obviously baptism, like Baptist, like it is still a religion. It's like a specific denomination that they follow, essentially. I'm not entirely certain like what the big difference is between Baptists and like necessarily like other similar like Christian based religions. I know the Baptists, like, they believe once you're saved, you're always saved. You have to be baptized as like the next step, which that's where it came from. I'm assuming that's where the name came from. Okay. Probably should fact check myself on that one, but that's essentially like the basis of the doctrine. Right. It's like you believing that Jesus died, rose from the dead, and then
Got it. So that's very similar to like Christianity. Yeah. However, like, we were talking and you were talking to me about like how you grew up and how you had like a lot of rules, or you couldn't do this or couldn't do that. So what does that look like? Or tell my followers like some of the things that you had to go through.
Yeah, so honestly, most of the churches I was in growing up were very legalistic. So they based everything around rules and not necessarily the doctrine, which is very, obviously there are black and white things in the Bible, but there's also a lot of gray areas, like how you dress, like stuff like that, like how you present yourself, you know? Like, but growing up, one thing I'll never forget is like I had to wear skirts and dresses past my knee. I wasn't allowed to wear pants. Women weren't allowed to be like heads of leadership in the church. If you were married, you had to basically be like a submissive, humble wife. Pretty much my whole life, like being in the church, I was always told like you have to be meek, you have to be humble, like you have to be submissive to your husband and all this stuff. Like there wasn't much talk about pursuing a career, pursuing your dreams and stuff. It was more so this is your one purpose, and like it's to get married and have kids and serve in a ministry or church or whatever. So that was something that I heard constantly. And it wasn't necessarily from my parents per se, as more so just the environment I was in.
Right. Yeah, so like you have to be women have to be like passive, pretty much, and walked all over. And I'm
very much not. Yeah. So that caused a lot of issues when I was getting older.
You're like, hey, I'm here. Oh, that's not me. Hi. Yeah. So I would say there's like a lot of sexism then.
Oh, yeah, that, absolutely.
That's not okay.
Yeah, I could go on and on about that part forever.
Yeah, so let me hear about it. Let's hear about the sexism issues in baptism.
I can think of
that being a Baptist.
So I wouldn't like generalize it and say it's like every Baptist church, because I have attended a few that seemed at least surface level seemed nice, you know, weren't as traditional and old fashioned as the ones I had grown up in. But I can tell you like one specific incident that this kind of stuff I heard all the time and would happen all the time. But when I was about 14 or 15, like, I'd been interested in joining the military for a long time, but around that age is when I started, like, talking about it more, and I had talked about it to some of, like, my youth leaders, and one of my youth leaders, he was an Army veteran, and, like, he was actually very encouraging about it, and he was, like, talking to me about his experience and stuff, and giving me advice and everything, and then somehow, like, the pastor of the church got wind of it, and he pulled me into his office, which would happen to me a lot because I was definitely labeled as, like, the loud, rebellious kid that everyone needed to fix, you know, because I didn't let people walk all over me or, like, tell me to be quiet all the time. Like, that was one thing I hate about the church, kind of church I grew up in, is, like, women were very silenced. And but he pulled me into his office and was like, so I hear you were talking about wanting to join the military, is that right? And I'm like, yeah, I want to, yeah. And he's like, you know, that's really not a place for women. And I looked at him and I'm like, okay, explain, like, what do you mean? Yeah. And then he was talking about how, like, the Bible says that the woman should be a home, like, caretaker and, like, be a good wife and all this stuff. And I'm like, where in the Bible does it say I can't be in the military? Right. Like, show me. And he couldn't. So he just continued to harp on, like, women should be this, women should act this way, women should, you know, all the meek and submissive and humble bull crap he could throw at me. And I don't know, that's just, like, one specific incident that I very vividly remember because it made me so pissed off. I was like, no. Yeah, it would me too. Yeah. Like, you deserve to be who you want to be. Yeah. Damn. Yeah, I don't know if that church would like me very much either. Oh, no, they hated me. It was a wild ride while I was there. Yeah, so being that your parents were in the church, obviously, also, how did your relationship with your parents, how was that affected? Like, how did your religion affect your relationship with them? If it was very hard because I didn't feel understood or heard most of the time, because I felt like a lot of the times I wasn't allowed to have my own opinion because from their viewpoint, everything had to be based off the church, everything had to be based off the Bible, like what the church wanted us to do and everything. And so it definitely caused a strain because I would come to them and be like, hey, like, this was said to me. Like, I told my mom about, like, the whole thing the pastor said to me, and she was like, what? Like, she agreed with me that didn't make any sense, and, like, that wasn't, like, that's not unbiblical if that's what you believe in, but at the same time, like, there wasn't anyone necessarily, like, standing up for me. On your side. Yeah. Like, at home, they seemed somewhat supportive and, like, understood a bit, but no one was verbally standing up for me when it happened. Right. So it looked to, like, the people in the church like I was just acting out and rebelling, which in fact I wasn't at all. Right, you were just trying to be your own person, as you should be able to do. So now, do you still practice that religion? No, I'm actually going through a process of, like, deconstruction. Okay. I don't really know where I'm going to end up at the end of it. Yeah. But I haven't gone to church in a long time. Honestly, it's very triggering for me because I went through a lot growing up in these types of churches, and so it's kind of hard for me to be in that environment because all I can think about is how I was treated my whole life. Right. Being in that kind of environment. And yeah, I have attended some, like, good churches, like, as an adult and everything, but it's still just is a constant reminder. Right. And I just kind of in the process right now of, like, deconstructing, like, all the trauma, pretty everything much. Yeah, trying to recover from that and heal, and then also trying to remove, I guess, all the beliefs and everything that was shoved down my throat that weren't even biblical. Right. And they claim to follow the Bible, they claim that God's word is the only way, but then they twist it into their own opinions. Their own, and they make their own rules and then expect you to follow their rules. Exactly. So if you're comfortable, like, what other trauma things did you have to go through that affects you today? So I mentioned it earlier, something you said you didn't really know about, but I definitely say one of the biggest ones would be purity culture. Okay. Which is something that's a term that I guess if you grew up in that kind of environment, that's something you would know about, even if you didn't. I guess a lot of people don't know the term, but they understand. Right. When you start talking about it, they're like, oh yeah, I was someone said something like that to me. Let me actually open my notes for it. So basically, like, purity culture is, like, they basically would make anything regarding anything sexual or sex in general, they would make it seem as if it's like the worst of the worst to possibly do. And if you do anything sexual, or if you have sex, then you are this broken, like, destroyed person that, like, they'd always say stuff like, you need to save yourself for your future husband, and if you do anything before marriage, like, you're giving away parts of yourself, and your future husband's not going to have you as a whole person. Like, they make it seem like you're not you anymore, like, you're not a person anymore.
Right.
And, like, they may not directly say that, but that's the effect it had on us.
Right. And that caused a lot of trauma.
Oh, yeah, it did. Like, one thing I have a huge issue with about that is, like, they make you feel at fault and very, very, very guilty if you did do anything. And, like, one thing that I think is really, really harmful with that whole philosophy and, like, teaching is if, say, you were to go through some kind of traumatic event or assault or something, you are gonna, and that's something that you were taught for so long or something you believed in, like, that's gonna be super damaging, because then you're gonna think, oh my gosh,
that's your fault.
Yeah, you're either gonna think it's your fault, you're gonna be silenced into shame because of it, because you're like, I'm not a whole person anymore, like, no one's gonna want me because, like, I'm broken and damaged, you know?
Wow.
That's, like, one of the huge, that's something I personally struggled with.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
Like, the effects that would have.
Yeah, it has effect on, like, a whole big spectrum of different things.
I think it's funny how they view it that way, even though their whole religion is sexism based. You know, like, they're shaming women for this. Like, don't do this because then your husband can't have you as a whole. But it's like, okay, what about the men? Or, like...
Yeah, no, it was very, very, very targeted towards women. Right. But there was no, like... One thing that also bothers me is, like, there's no... Whether you think you should have... Whether you believe it's right or wrong to have sex before marriage, there was no one teaching us about consent. There was no one teaching us about safe sex. Like, literally nothing. Right. Like, especially, like, I think consent is a huge one, because then, like, these girls are confused, and they're like, is it my fault because I dress this certain way, or I look immodest, you know? Because that's, like, a huge issue with, like, how I grew up was always, like, you're going to be... I heard this all the time, is, like, if you dress this way or you're wearing that, you're going to be a stumbling block to men. Oh, my gosh. And then, obviously, that inherently makes you think it's your fault if they look at you a certain way, if they do anything...
Like, how is the men not at fault?
Yeah, exactly. That is something I argued with people about.
Yeah, because I don't care if I'm going down the street in my bikini. If someone comes and sexually assaults me, that just because I was dressed a certain way doesn't mean I was asking for anything.
Yeah, exactly.
And also, it doesn't give them a right either.
Absolutely not.
It doesn't give them permission.
Every single person should be held accountable for their own actions. It's not... No one person is accountable for another person's actions. Right.
And then also, in our conversation that you just mentioned, I thought of I'm not sure at what part in the Bible, but you've probably heard of it, the stoning parable. I'm not sure if it's a parable, but like a story. Yeah, and how, like...
Or, like, the
prostitute. Okay. And, like, Jesus basically said, like, okay, you all want to stone her. Whoever has not sinned can cast the first stone. And nobody could cast that stone because everyone has sinned. Yeah. So I don't understand how in the Baptist religion they're saying sex is this sin right here, but everyone else's other sin is down here. Yeah. When Jesus said, if you even committed this sin, you can't cast a stone to this sin because they're the same. Yeah. A sin is a sin, and it shouldn't be labeled as high as it was in your sense. Yeah. So that, like, doesn't make sense to me either. If they want to talk biblically, like, let's talk it.
Yeah. No, that's another thing I said earlier, like, how very legalistic they were, was they made up their own rules, they made up their own ideas and ideologies that really had nothing to do with the Bible, or if they claimed it did, and they would take verses and twist them. And, like, another thing that I struggled with for a while, fortunately I feel like I've overcome it, is, like, a lot of, like, body and self-esteem issues from that, because it made me feel ashamed of my body. Or, like, it also made me ashamed of having any kind of natural sexual desires. And it's like, they never even talked about that either. They made it seem like it was awful and terrible for you to have any kind of desire. Right. Especially women.
Which is, like,
but then
normal.
they expect you, like, once you're married, like, give it up like a porn star, you know?
Right.
Like,
what?
It doesn't make sense.
Just as one label.
You can't suppress someone for so long, and then as soon as they're married, be like, yeah, go do whatever you want. Like,
that doesn't make any sort of sense.
No. It's not healthy for your relationship with yourself either.
Yeah, absolutely not. So, is there any other, like, main pinpoints that you would say that were traumatic during your experience growing up?
I have another story for you.
Yes, let's hear it all. I'm here for it.
Like, it actually relates to the whole purity culture thing, but there's this thing that they use called object lessons.
Okay.
So basically, I remember going to summer camps. They do these at, like, youth group events and stuff when they're talking to a bunch of teenagers and stuff. They would use an object, and so basically, one example I can think of is, like, a rose. And they would, what I remember specifically one time, the pastor brings out this rose, and he's like, hey, like, doesn't this rose look pretty? And everyone's like, yeah. And so he hands it around. He's like, okay, pass it around, pluck the petals off one by one. And then he passes it around. Everyone does that. And he's like, okay, bring it back up here. So he takes it back, and he's like, who wants this now? And everyone's like, what? No, because, like, the petals are gone or whatever, you know? And then he, like, tries to make a point by saying, when you give a piece of yourself away, if you have sex with someone or you do anything with someone, you're, like, giving away parts of yourself till you're not anything anymore. And then he was like, that's how, like, basically how you're viewed as.
Right.
And that's extremely damaging.
Yeah. But, like, also, again, if they want to be biblical, I fuck up and God still wants me and God still loves me. Also,
we were created in God's image, so why are we ashamed of our bodies and desires?
Right. And God knows that, like, this is my personal opinion, like, I do believe that there are sins and things like that, but at the end of the day, to me, God's not shaming me.
No,
he's
not.
cheering me on to do better or, like, draw near to him. Like, he loves us so much. Not like, oh, you did this, so I'm gonna punish you. And you know what I mean? That's just my personal opinion, how I grew up. But how you're explaining it, it sounds like basically if you did anything, like, God's gonna hate you.
Yeah.
That's awful. Because then I'm sure you felt like you have to follow every single step, every single order to make sure that you're accepted by God.
Yes.
And others around you, but, like, ultimately God. And that sucks. And it sucks that people who go through the things that you went through or religions like this, it steers them away from even wanting to find God in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not fair because that trauma could have pushed you away from something that could be so good if you found it in the right way for you.
Yeah.
But so, like, my story, I grew up basically like there was always a God.
Mm-hmm.
And to believe in stuff, and my family was like believers, but we never were like churchgoers or like really practiced it. But when on my dad's side, I grew up Seventh-day Adventist.
Okay.
So that's very like Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember like one time I was in the backyard at my dad's house, and I was wearing like a bra and a tank top and some shorts, and it was like summertime. And I was young to the point where I just started wearing bras, but, like, I was young enough to still be playing, like, in the mud, like, making, like, mud pies and shit. And I just remember him, like, coming out of the house and yelling at me because my bra strap was showing and how I'm disgusting for that and that I need to go change. And the fact that he was, like, he literally said, that's disgusting. When I'm, like, literally, first of all, in the middle of a country, so nobody can see me, and I'm playing in the fucking mud. Like, what's more innocent than that?
Yeah.
And then he made me feel like I'm gross to be wearing, first of all, also a bra that I just started wearing, so obviously I'm still, like, weird and securely about it as I'm hitting puberty. So, like, the Seventh-day Adventist culture is also very like that. But good thing, like, I didn't really get pushed into it too much just because I only went to my dad's house like every other weekend. But then when I turned 18, I think, I found God for myself. And then I started going to a church, a non-denominational Christian church, and like that's been the most refreshing view that I've ever like experienced, because like even till this day, like I've gone to my pastor and said like, hey, like I'm doing this and experiencing this, but I'm having issues of where my religion is if I'm doing this and stuff. And, like, he's made me feel comfortable enough to talk to him about it. And, like, I think that's important.
Yeah.
Because he was able to give me his viewpoints on, like, yeah, of course you're going to have these temptations. Of course you're going to have these feelings. And make me feel comfortable and try to relate it into a way I would understand for religion. And he never once, like, shamed me or told me any of the things that you were told.
Yeah, and that's how it should be, because Christianity is supposed to be about love and acceptance.
Yeah. So it's very interesting that, like, I've only had this one I don't really count Seventh-day Adventist because I was so young.
Mm-hmm.
But as an adult, I've only had this, like, one experience. And then when people tell me, like, their church isn't like that, and I'm like, wow, like, wow, I wouldn't even want to go if I was going to be looked down on.
Yeah, that's why it's very hard for me to have the desire to go to church anymore.
Right.
Because I've definitely been told, like, oh, well, not everyone's like that. Not every church is like that. I'm like, okay, maybe that's so, but that wasn't my experience.
Right.
So
I'm going to pause this for a second. Sorry, I had to stop that recording because of my son. It's not easy doing a podcast with a 3-year-old around. I don't suggest anyone trying that. So we were talking about basically my experience, and then how I don't feel like in my experience I was, like, ever judged, or, like, I don't think God is punishing me. I think he's, like, all for me, loving me. And then you mentioned how you said, like, depression, and that was, like, a big thing in baptism. Or I keep saying baptism, Baptist.
Yeah, I wouldn't even necessarily say Baptist, just, like, the churches I grew up in.
Okay.
Because, I don't know, I don't want to generalize and say, like, all is like that.
Right.
I mean, there's definitely probably churches out there who don't act like that or treat people like that. But
okay.
So basically the thing about talking about, like, depression and stuff is, one thing I remember hearing was, like, saying how God might be punishing someone, like, if they are depressed or if they're sick, and then they made it seem like if you were depressed, like, it was a sin because you're not close enough to God, or your spiritual life isn't good, and stuff like that. And there was no push to get actual help. It was just pray about it. You need to be closer to God. Your relationship with God isn't right. Like, I remember when I was younger, I was going through some stuff, and it was really hard for me. And I remember being told those things by youth leaders, by the pastor, and I was like, what?
Yeah.
Like, looking back now, I was like, that was so damaging.
Right. To think that your mental health can be changed by God. And, like, don't get me wrong, also, in my opinion, I think God can, like, help.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, also, mental health can be a genetics thing. It can be a chemical imbalance.
Yeah.
Things that literally you have to go get help for.
Yeah. And I think everyone should be encouraged to get help for it. Like,
yeah.
The last thing I'd ever do is tell someone that their walk with God is bad, or they're doing something wrong and that's why they're depressed. Like, no, it's not up to you to make that decision. Right.
It's literally, like, your mind. So one point I wanted to talk about is, like, how did baptism work in the religion you grew up in?
Getting baptized?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically the criteria for being baptized in the church was that you had to proclaim your salvation, like, you had to believe in Jesus Christ and, like, believe that he died on the cross and rose from the dead. And then after you make, like, that proclamation of salvation and everything, then you can be baptized.
Okay.
And that is essentially, like, the next step.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so did you, not you, but, like, did the religion that you were involved with, did they baptize kids?
Yeah, they did. As long as they could talk and say that they believed in God and were saved, then they could get baptized.
Okay, so because I know some religions, I think, like, Catholic, they do it, like, as a baby.
Yeah.
So one experience that I had, which I really appreciated my church for this, was there's this thing called, like, dedication. Mm-hmm. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
So, like, I asked my pastor because he was like, hey, are you interested in getting, like, your son dedicated? And I was like, well, I want to, like, fully understand what that is before I sign up my son for this.
Yeah.
And basically, like, how he described it is, like, they don't do baptism that young because you need to be, like, at least probably, like, 15, 16, like, well aware of what your beliefs are and being able to say, like, those words and be able to accept it for yourself. So they don't do baptisms for babies because they don't have that option to speak up for themselves and to know what they're wanting to do. So, like, the dedication was basically me and his dad dedicating our son, saying, like, we're going to try to raise him to follow God and give him that good, loving home. But I really appreciated that because then I look at other religions and think, like, these kids are getting baptized, like, essentially against their will.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a voice and they can't decide that for themselves. And that really, like, grinds my gears because, like, who says that I get to choose for you if you want to be baptized?
Yeah, I respect that they, like, don't want you to get baptized until you're, like, 15 or 16 so you can fully understand it. Because I remember when I was younger, I know looking back I didn't understand it, but I said I was saved. I think I was like 6 or 7. Like, I was really young. I said I was saved and that I believed in Jesus and everything and all that stuff, but looking back, I was just repeating everything I was told.
Right.
Like, I didn't understand what that meant.
Yeah.
And then I was, like, baptized after.
Okay.
And everything. Like, I remember specifically, like, praying with my parents to, like, save my soul and everything. And
yeah, that's really damaging. Yeah, I don't know if, like, the age is, like, 15 or... I think it's just basically, like, in our church, your mental age, like, where you can fully understand what's going on. But, yeah, so have you tried practicing any other, like, religion beliefs or, like, looked into any other things? I know you said you're still under, like, deconstructing and... But...
No, I mean... I've been trying to learn a little bit about different religions and stuff. Not because I'm necessarily interested in practicing anything. Like, honestly, I don't want to be associated with any religion right now. But I just find it very fascinating to learn about all these different things. Because growing up, I was always told, like, whether you believe it or you don't, like, I was always told that the Bible is the only way to heaven and Christianity. Like, this is the only way. And now as an adult, I'm like... I want to know about other religions. Like, yeah,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, because one thing I've thought about recently that so the Bible is written by men who claim to be inspired by God or spoken to by God, and and they wrote these books of the Bible. But then I was thinking about it. I'm like, isn't every other religion also men and women who claim to either be inspired by God or a higher being or something, and then wrote this religion? You know, I don't know. It's just something that made me really think, and I'm like. They couldn't all be right.
So what you're saying, or what I'm getting from that is these people who are inspired to be like God are writing these books, but every individual is different. So whatever they inspire to be or however they took it, they're writing this book, which is obviously going to be very different versions.
Well, I'm not necessarily talking about just the Bible, just like all these other religions too are people who wrote these books for this religion claiming to be inspired by God, a higher being or whatever it's based on, you know?
Right.
So it all, I can't say all because I'm not entirely sure, because I don't know everything about every religion, but the ones that I do understand, they claim to be inspired by some higher being or power, and it's like, it's very interesting to me that the Christianity is so focused on this being the one and only way, when the basis and the start of this was the same basis and start of some of these other religions as well. So then it's like, which one's actually true?
Right, because you have to take in factor, like, bias, grains of salt, you know, what people took from what to write whatever religion they're writing for, you know, things like that. Yeah, I don't know, I never thought about that way.
Because it's like, all these religions have such different views and such different things you have to follow to get to heaven, paradise, whatever it is. So, does that...
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But I also think a lot of them are very similar. Like my sister, which if she's listening to this, sorry if I get it wrong, but like, I guess I don't know exactly what she's following now, but like she wears like a head wrap and like, she does like the whole... fasting thing and things like that, but like the way she explained it to me is like their Bible and like Christianity's Bible are very like aligned. So like then there's that aspect that, you know, a lot of these religions could have started at the same, but then they branched off into different something else. Like a
Yeah.
tree. Like, they might all have the same base, but then they branch off into different weird ways.
Yeah, I guess the more so this question that I've just been thinking about it a lot is if they all claim to be, well, I guess
The right
they
way.
all, yeah, if they all claim to be the right way and
Then which
claim
one's
to
the
be
right
inspired
way?
by God, which one is it then?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they all have different ways of getting to heaven, paradise, or whatever,
Right.
which one
do we?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I think, like, for my journey personally, it's more so about my relationship with God.
Yeah.
And that's why I've kind of, like, I go to, like, a non-denominational, like, because I want to focus on my relationship with God. And God will speak to my heart, and he will lead me the way I need to. And he might lead you a different way, but that doesn't mean your way's right and my way's wrong.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And that's why I think focusing on your relationship with a higher power or whatever you want to believe in is important, because that path is for you. It's not for anybody else. And what he tells you or someone else might not be the same thing that he tells me that I need to do for myself.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that they're right or wrong. And at the end of the day, God still loves me. So,
yeah.
So that's all I have to, that's basically what I focus on, is, like, instead of all these rules, like, what is God saying to me personally?
Mm-hmm.
But, do your parents still practice?
They do, yeah. My dad's still pastoring.
Okay. So now that you're an adult and you're kind of on your own, figuring out your own journey, how do they respond to that?
So it's actually not something that I've talked to them about, really.
Interesting. Okay.
I haven't told them about me deconstructing or anything. I don't think that it's something that they would necessarily understand. They definitely would not agree with it.
Right.
I would probably hear about how I've strayed from God and,
right.
you know, my relationship with God is lacking and stuff like that. And it's just that terminology and stuff, it is kind of triggering for me because of the churches I grew up in. And that's not something I blame my parents for or anything, honestly. Like, I love my parents and we have a good relationship, but it's not something I feel comfortable enough yet opening up to them about. Like, I've talked to my mom about my issues with the church, and, like, she knows my standpoint on a lot of things about the issues and some of the things we discuss, like, so she understands that and where I'm coming from. But the whole, like, deconstruction process and me not going to church and me not really knowing where I stand yet on this isn't something that I've talked to her about.
Right. And then you have siblings, right?
I do, yes.
How many siblings do you have?
4.
Oh, my Lanta.
Yeah.
So how is your relationship with them? Or, like, do they know that you're doing this process for yourself? Or
I've talked to a couple of my sisters, and they understand why I'm going through this and, like, why it's something I have to figure out for myself. Because, I mean, obviously we all grew up together. They saw what happened to me. And I'm not saying, like, my experience was harder, worse than theirs, but I did take a big brunt of it because I have always been very outspoken and not meek and mild like they wanted me to be. So I definitely took a big hit from that, which I'm still, even though it was very difficult, like, I'm proud that my younger self did stand up for herself, because, you know, that's rough. That was hard. Yeah. But it is something I've talked to some of them about, and they understand why I'm doing it.
Yeah. Are any of them younger?
I'm the oldest of all of them. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also kind of good, though, also, because if they have any questions that aren't maybe in the same viewpoint as your parents or that religion, like, I'm sure that you probably can make them feel comfortable and that they can come to you and ask you questions, since you're more of like the outcast, or, like, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, they might look at it like, oh, well, if I told her, like, she probably wouldn't judge me if I said this or told her this.
Yeah, they talk to me about a lot of stuff they feel like they can't talk to other people about, because they know I've been through a lot, so they know I'm not gonna say anything to anyone about it, and also, like, I want to be able to give them an outlet to voice their opinion and their thoughts on it. Right. Because I didn't have that when I was younger. Yeah. So I want to be able to be that for them.
So how did friendships and stuff go growing up? Being that your parents were so conservative and so, like...
All my friendships were really just with other people in the church. Okay. I was also homeschooled most of my life, so pretty much all my social interactions were people in that church community. So oh, wow. I really didn't have friends outside of that circle.
Right. So meaning how I mentioned earlier at the very beginning of this podcast, which is completely opposite of what you went through, I think it's important to have friends that are different than you, that have different experiences, and you never got that.
I really didn't, no. It wasn't until I got into high school and, like, was working and stuff, and I was talking to and becoming friends with people who either weren't religious or believed in a different religion or things like that, where I was actually able to hear and see different viewpoints. And I always found that super interesting. Like, I love hearing about other people's experiences. Like,
Right.
I just always want to absorb as much knowledge as I can. So, like, that's something I've always really enjoyed being able to speak to people about.
Yeah. And this is just like a opinion of mine or something that I maybe like came up with in my head, but like if you and other kids were only friends with people who followed the same way as you did, had to follow the same rules, this, that, the other, in my opinion, that would cause for a very judgmental generation.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because now when you see other people who have different opinions and different experiences, you're probably like, since you were taught all these things, like, oh, they're such a bad person, or they're disgusting, or this, that, the other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sad because that's not true.
Yeah. I say, I know I definitely thought it that way when I was much younger, but because I started kind of, I guess, quote unquote, rebelling or whatever at such a young age and questioning literally everything.
Right.
I was starting to see things from a different viewpoint.
Yeah.
So, and also, fortunately, I've had parents that are very, like, taught me to be very respectful and, like, of other people's opinions and beliefs and who they are as people and everything, whether I agree with it or not. So, fortunately, with how my parents raised me, that's not something that I necessarily had to grow out of as an adult or anything.
But I'm sure a lot of...
No, there's definitely... I've experienced a lot of people who are like that.
Yeah. I could feel that just because also with the difference between my dad's side and my mom's side, I felt a lot of that, like, judgment on my dad's side. And then my mom's side, my mom's the least judgmental person I've ever met.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was living with my mom, who was accepting of everybody, and even if they literally just did something wrong, she'd be like, well, maybe this, or like, we still have to accept them, or still open our doors to them to help them. And then my dad's side, it was like, don't talk to them, don't look at them, don't befriend them, this, that, the other. And it's like, they're still people, and they are still human, and they made a mistake, but we make mistakes too. So I never understood why my dad's side was so, like, you know, so, like, I've kind of seen both of those sides, but it's just crazy. I remember, like, growing up and going to my dad's and then having to, I would literally pack, like, certain clothes that I could wear over there.
Oh, wow.
And even when I packed those certain clothes, there would still be a comment about it. And I'd be like, well, this is all I thought that you would approve of, but it, like, still, like, wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
So, and, like, you said that you experienced that with your clothing.
Oh, yeah.
And, like...
I was strictly wearing dresses and skirts until I was 12.
That's so crazy.
Yeah.
Do you have any other comments or, like, tips or things that you want to tell the people who are listening at all?
I don't know.
No?
I guess don't be scared to ask questions.
Yeah, don't be scared to ask questions. Don't be scared to follow many different religions and find which one's
definitely
the best
do your
for
own,
you.
like, do your own research, because everything was shoved down my throat, and it was wrong to question it.
Right.
And, like, as I became a teenager, I was like, no, I want to know about everything else, and then I was, like, villainized for thinking that way.
And do what's best for you and what feels good in your heart.
Yes.
And that's how you become the best version of yourself.
Yes.
And don't be scared also to have these conversations with your friends, because I could learn something, you could learn something, and then that could broaden your views, broaden your research, something that you wouldn't have thought of, or things like that. So I think these conversations are super healthy.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and I would love to hear your viewpoint on religion, beliefs, and we can have a conversation about that. In the description box below, there'll be a link to come on my podcast and have conversations with me. So go ahead and fill that out. Support me with all my links, and we will get back to you next episode.